Hi, I'm Mia speaking first. She, her pronouns, please.
Hello, I'm Sophie. I'll be doing second and reply she, they pronoun, please.
Hi, I'm Callum. I'll be doing the third. He, they, please.
Thank you very much. And team KWSTC twice.
Hi, my name is Ethan. I'll be going first and reply for all position.
Hi, my name is John. I go by she, her pronouns, and I'll be speaking second.
Hi, my name is Sue. I'll be speaking for Whip.
Cool. Thank you very much. Same rules apply as is usually done in the WSTC format. I'm sure you're all familiar. Speeches are 8 minutes for substantive and 4 for reply. I'll make sure I have the timer here as well and share some timing markers in the chat, but just in case I forget, I really encourage all speakers to have a timer with you as well, just to make sure that the tracking is to the second in the way that is most accurate for your speech. And all equity rules apply. I hope that there's no technical issues, but if there's any, we'll sort it out as we go. Any questions before we start the round? Great. In that case, I wish you all the best for the grand finals. With that info slide being provided, the motion reads, this House regrets the decline of lifetime employment. Without further ado, I would like to invite first proposition to speak and open the hearing.
Hello, can I check that I am audible and visible okay?
Yes, both.
Perfect. Okay, I will take my POIs verbally. I won't look at the chat, so I won't see them if you put them there. Okay, I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. We, the worker ants, are forced to toil away serving the interest of our masters for our entire lives. Only when they are forced to care about us can we avoid being trampled. One point of setup then on what opposition have to defend and what we defend as our stance. They have to defend A, workplaces with an expectation of movement, meaning that firing employees is a norm in their society, insofar as people expect that people will regularly move their careers. But B, they have to defend the rise of an economy known as the gig economy, whereby people are forced into bad contracts, low-hour contracts, in contrast to the stability and the certainty provided by lifetime employment. First argument then on how we on our side are able to create better relationships with career and work for individuals. The thesis of this claim is that your career and your ability to work is one of the most important things in your life. You spend a huge amount of your time at your job, and it is incredibly important for your mental and physical health that this job is something which is beneficial to you and which you find enjoyable. First point then on why this company invests in you more under our side of the house. 3 reasons here. A, they have a guaranteed return. They know that any money they put into ensuring you have an enjoyable time in that workforce or training they put in place for you is notably going to guarantee them some benefit insofar as they know that you will stay within that company. B, personal relationships. Because notice, when you have a lifetime employment contract, you just form close personal relationships with all of the people that you work with. Your bosses become like family insofar as you know them and you grow up together over a period of many decades. You just know these people, and therefore they have a huge incentive to ensure that you are well looked after and well invested in insofar as they care about you personally. There are just more resources available to these companies, insofar as they no longer have to do things like lengthy and complicated training processes for new employees who are coming in at every stage of the company. Then they are able to save a vast amount of money by only doing this training once when these new graduates come in. But what does this mean then to impacts? Firstly, on training, this company is just way more likely to train you in things like upskilling you in order to be able to access higher levels of the career ladder, such as supervisor or manager. They have an incentive to do this for the reasons I've just outlined. But secondly, they have a huge incentive to ensure that your working conditions are adequate. This is for 4 distinct reasons. A, companies know that happy workers make better workers. A worker who is completely burnt out, who never sees their family and never gets a day off, is not going to be one who dedicates their life to your company in a beneficial way. It's not going to be one who actually works in a way that is most beneficial to you. Therefore, you have a huge incentive to ensure that people are personally taken care of. But B, the personal connections that I've just characterized mean that you care about your employees. You care about ensuring that people going through difficult mental health periods are able to access therapy on the company dime, insofar as you just care about them as an individual and know that them getting better is important for them as an individual and for you as a company. But C, individuals no longer fear reporting issues that they experience within the company. Underside opposition, people who go to their company's leaders and say, I have an issue that I would like to be resolved, are unlikely to do so because they know that they could be fired for that action. Under our side, where you know that you are not going to have your employment contract terminated, you are far more willing to report these issues, far more likely to ensure that they are actually far more likely to live a happy and comfortable life. But the D on why these companies are likely to care about your working conditions is because they themselves need a good image. Not the graduates who choose which companies to pursue for their lifetime contract of employment still needs to know that their company is going to be beneficial and provide something beneficial for them, this means they have an incentive to pursue having a good relationship and a good image, which means they care about your working conditions and ensure that you're well protected. Why then do employees work well for this company? Why do they get complacent in these jobs when they know that they cannot be fired? 3 reasons. A, personal connections. Again, you simply feel bad about not working when other people are working hard. B, you have a deep knowledge of how that company works, given that you've worked there for several decades. You understand the systems and the protocols which are in place and why they are in place, meaning that you are a very good and beneficial employee to that company. But thirdly, you just care about longevity. This means that under our side of the house, what you are likely to do is put in place long-term plans for that company, long-term financial plans, which ensure that the company is going to be fiscally viable in 10, 20 years, because you know that you are going to be around to see the benefits of that policy. Under opposition, you have no such incentive because you know that you are likely to either be fired or to simply move on in a few years, meaning that you just do not do these things, which can make these workplaces more beneficial in the long term. This means that even though you know that there is no termination likely in your contract, you still try in these jobs, you still become good employees, and therefore all of the reasons about why they invest heavily in you and care about protecting you as an employee stand even stronger. Before I move on to my second point, I'll take a point.
Worker suicide and workplace harassment was highest when people had to stay in one place for their life. How do you defend this?
We defend this by saying that the alternative you must stand over is worse. The alternative of low hour contracts, the alternative of contracts which are actively harmful to individuals is far worse and is likely to lead you to have poor mental health for all of the reasons I'm about to go on and cover in this argument. Second argument then on giving workers greater stability and certainty. The thesis of this claim is that not having access to stability in the workforce necessarily means that you're unable to access long-term mental health benefits and therefore you have a worse quality of life. Things which are stable under our side then, which they cannot claim. 4 things. 1, your income. You know you have a guaranteed income from this company for the rest of your employment life. This means you're just able to do things like plan effectively. Secondly, your career progression is certain. This means you know clearly how the company progression of your career is likely to pan out. You know what it looks like and you know what you need to do in order to prepare for it. It just means that you are able to decrease that anxiety that comes under opposition, where you simply are unable to explain or understand exactly how to progress in an individual career. Thirdly, your work hours are certain. You've entered into a contract with this company and they're likely to guarantee you a set number of hours and guarantee a degree of flexibility in that contract as well. This looks like them being willing to give you flexible work hours for if you've just had a child or if you have a familial emergency which means you need to work from home. This is all something that we get guaranteed and stable under our side of the house, where op must defend fluctuation. D, administrative benefits are more beneficial under our side. Things like your pension or your healthcare level of support is just more stable because you know that it's going to come from the same employer. Therefore, you're able to do things like plan in the future and not have to worry about something as important as your pension being ping-ponged between the different companies that you are operating under. Why then are these things not stable in opposition? Why do these companies believe that they can fire you at any moment? 2 reasons. Firstly, because it is just more societally acceptable under their side of the house to fire people, because the society and the culture that is created when you terminate lifetime employment is just one that contends with people constantly moving around the workforce, constantly leaving their jobs and changing to other ones. This means that firing someone is not seen to be as damaging because you believe that they're going to get a job immediately again, even if this is not the case. But B, you could be sacked for very small errors. For example, people are much more willing to just sack you for having a poor performance in one single quarter because again, they believe that you're going to be able to access employment much more quickly due to the gig economy which is created under their side of the house. Notice the harms of being without employment for even a few weeks in this cutthroat economy is extremely dire. You could not be able to pay your rent in your house. You could not be able to afford groceries. You could not be able to support your family. All of these things are things that op must contend with. A gig economy where people are encouraged to fluctuate in their careers and encouraged to not pursue stability. What then does stability and certainty allow you to access? 3 things here. Firstly, stability in your job allows you to access freedom. Notice, even if panel, you believe that we are infringing upon people's access to have freedom over where they work, we just believe it is more important that people are able to access freedom over every single component of their lives. For example, the freedom to make choices because you know that in the 10 or 20 years, you will still have a stable income. This means you're more willing to do things like pursue your actual passions, pursue things that matter to you, because you know that you have the financial backing to ensure that this will still be a stable and a possible thing for you to do in the long term. But B, you are able to plan for the future. Panel, this is incredibly important. This means that you're able to do things like plan for having a family and know that that is something which is both financially and socially viable for your family. You are able to do things like planning to get onto the property ladder, buying a property and buying a house. All of this is because you are able to say that in 10, 20 years, I will still have this legitimate employment. I'll be able to pay my mortgage. I'll be able to provide for my family and I'll be able to ensure my children get their education. All of this means that you're just willing to do things which you just aren't willing to do on opposition, because in the gig economy, in an economy with poor contracts, you're just far more likely to do things like withhold from having children or having the family you so desperately crave, because you believe it's possible that this will never be a financially viable option for you, given that you could always at any time be fired from the job which you currently reside at. But third reason here is that you have a level of societal trust. People like banks will give you loans and will give you these mortgages because they understand that you will have legitimate employment in 10 or 20 years' time, because we give you the freedom to make choices over every other part of your life without being coerced by the masters of your work. So proud to propose.
All right, thank you very much. First proposition for those very fine remarks. To start the case in the opposition side of the house, I'd like to invite the first opposition to speak here.
Hey, can you hear me and see me?
Yep, yep.
Cool. Before we begin, I do want to shout out my key WSDC friends, so Alex and other friends. Thank you for staying up at 5 a.m. to watch us debate in this finals. Okay, he and pronouns, verbal POS. If Scotland's economy is one where employers can just fire employees arbitrarily, I really don't know what to tell them. But that's not what my country looks like, because our country is one in which it has finally started to be free from the shackles of lifetime employment. One where you can sue companies if they do choose to fire you arbitrarily. One where you can sue companies for unjust and improbable cause of firing you. That is the world in which, finally, when you are free from the shackles of lifetime employment, is one in which you can hold companies accountable. And that's what we stood for inside opposition. We're very proud to oppose. Let's set up what this round is about that we think will cut out the majority of side proposition's case. One, what do we define as lifetime employment? We think this is largely a norm for companies to hire college graduates once they are out of college. This means that companies in their world would stop hiring workers at a certain age point, and that they expect you to be loyal to the company during your time there. Two, what does a world with the decline in lifetime employment look like? One, this is a retrospective motion, which means that this is assessing lifetime employment culture in Asian countries after they have declined. What that means is simple, that our burden is not to defend the gig economy or employers arbitrarily firing workers, because that is definitely not what South Korea looks like right now. South Korea looks like one in which employees have a lot more flexibility. They can choose which company to work at. They can sign contracts, for instance, that are in years such as 4 or 3 years, and they can choose to move to different companies when their contract is over. This is important because side proposition defend historical examples in which lifetime employment led to corporate abuse. This is a retrospective motion, and this is something that Scotland needs to contend with. On our side, we see a trend in status quo that we expect workers to move around to different companies and not be bound to one company for a lifetime. Notably, contrary to the trend of lifetime employment, moving around companies is not stigmatized on our side. One, our comparative is not the gig economy or bad contracts, as we've noted in setup. Three, what do we think retrospectively? Why do we think this decline has started happening? One is that society in Asian states has given rise to voices that challenge institutions, that people are okay with challenging institutions such as the lifetime employment institution. Two, that people have started caring more about stability, that maybe work isn't the only priority in life. Maybe where you live, your environment, and your happiness, these are things that are also important to you. This is important because the cause of decline suggests that society themselves has also begun to support an opposition to lifetime employment culture, that people have been increasingly aware that lifetime employment culture is not something that is as good. The fact that this decline has started happening, that people have started to the culture of lifetime employment suggests that this is something that people are likely unhappy with as well. With that, let's take a look at the case of side proposition. Their main push in the round seems to be that companies have incentives to better take care of workers insofar as you have lifetime employment. Response one, in argument two, we'll flip this argument to prove why companies being like family as they claim makes it harder for you to call out abuse. I'll flag you when I get there. Response two is that companies have incentives on their side to only provide good incentives for college graduates, Like they claim companies want the incentives and only want to hire college graduates on their side. They only have incentives to provide good conditions for those college graduates, not people higher up in the corporate ladder. Response 3, companies on our side have symmetric incentives too. That companies on our side also want to attract workers. Companies on our side also want workers who are now choosing to move companies after their 3-year contract is over. So this incentive is symmetric at best. It's not an exclusive benefit of the lifetime employment culture. Their second argument is that lifetime benefit, you have a lot more long-term benefits with the culture of lifetime employment. Response 1 is that this is just simply not true. That you can still have things like pensions on our side, that things like mental stability still exist on our side, that just because you choose to move companies doesn't mean that this suddenly disappears. With that, first argument as to why lifetime employment is something that is bad for workers. The thesis of this argument is that lifetime employment creates a reduction in the quality of workplace for employees. Reason 1 is that lifetime employment neglects the skills and efforts made by workers. That in lifetime employment culture, it is an honor to work and retire at one company for your entire life. That it is something that is seen as honorable and respectable. That a company praises loyalty to one company. The fact that you worked there for 20 years and rather you were able to, like, I don't know, not move to a different company. These are things that companies value on their side. Reason 2, it is for companies to fire inefficient workers, and they themselves concede this. They say it is hard for you to fire workers on their side. That is precisely the reason as to why, because companies guarantee stable employment, they often lack the capacity to fire employees who do not put in the effort, because the agreement is that you hire workers for a lifetime on their side. That is the trade-off that they need to accept. Reason 3 is that it reduces an incentive for workers themselves to work hard, because workers know that promotions are given with seniority and age anyways, that there is a larger emphasis on the loyalty of a company, that your effort that you put in is not as much valued, because companies value how long you stay at a company rather than how much effort and the skills that you have in the company. They know that they won't be fired either way, so they don't have incentives to try as hard in the workplace. Workers that know this don't have an incentive to put in that effort. The implication argument is simple. No thanks. 1, that companies in general are just much more inefficient. That companies do not have the capacity to fire workers that try hard, and don't have the capacity and don't want to reward workers that try hard, because they reward time in the company. They reward the fact that people has not left the company. What that means then is that companies are much less likely to reward effort. The second is that people just simply lack the will to work hard, that there's no point in working hard anyways if the only way in which you rise up the social ladder is by staying at a company for larger times. The weighting of this argument is simple, that even if your job is much more stable on their side, it is meaningless insofar as you do not want to work. That stability is good because it is conducive to you working and working harder within a company. That is what side proposition lacks, given that employees no longer have the incentive to work harder. Before the second argument, I'll take a point.
South Korean birth rates are plummeting because people cannot be sure that they will have access to stable employment in the future in order to support their families. Does this not prove that the decline of lifetime employment has harmed people's freedoms of choice in their lives?
Wait, 1, that is not true. That the reason why the birth rate is declining is not because of stable employment, it's because things like inflation is causing prices to rise. There are many different variety of factors that often influence this. Another reason is because often the reason why birth rates are declining is because that is just the culture in South Korea, that you would often prioritize having one child over having many children because you want to invest and funnel all of your money into that one child. Very uncharacteristic of South Korea. Second argument as to why lifetime employment reduces the capacity for workers to call out corporate abuse. The thesis of this argument is that lifetime employment creates a culture of dependence that workers have on companies that opens up opportunities for corporate abuse. Reason 1 is that lifetime employment acts as a binding mechanism, that employees are singularly dependent on one company for the employment, that they know that other companies aren't willing to hire them once they opt out, because all companies are looking for are college graduates. Once you are past that point, you are most likely not going to get rehired. Reason 2 is that leaving your job is stigmatized by society, that it is honorable to stay in one job, that once you leave a company, it was you who was not able to fit in, since everyone could, that if everyone could do so, why are you the odd one that could not fit into the company? Reason 3 is that companies create personal ties with you, that they themselves say companies are viewed as family, that companies are so valuable to you. That is the reason as to why, because the company spends so much time with you, you are unable to opt out, and it feels like there is a larger cost to you opting out, that a company made a mistake one time when it committed corporate abuse against you. So that makes it a lot harder harder for you to call out corporations once they do things like abuse. What is the comparative on our side? One, on our side, you have the capacity to pursue alternate jobs, that you're not singularly dependent on one company, that you can always negotiate with the company, that because you abuse me, I can move to different companies that are much more fulfilling and don't do things like abusing me. These are things that we uniquely provided on our side, where their culture of dependence on one company often shackled employees to corporations. And that is something that we can never support.
All right, I thank the speaker for those very fine remarks. Continuing the case in the proposition side of the House, I'd like to invite the second speaker on that side to speak, please. Here.
Hello, Sophie. Pronouns POIs in the chat, please. Before I start, I'd just like to say thank you so much to our coaches, who I think are obliged to be here anyway, and Emma, who's managed to stay up to the late hour of 9:15. Good on you. I know it's a bit past your bedtime. No, genuinely, thanks for being here, and thanks, Korea. Okay. Let's go in 3, 2, 1. I think it's lovely, but a bit naive, that the world that Korea sees is one that is dominated by the rise of the worker, where they have autonomy and power to fight for their rights and live out their passions. I think what the reality is over generations, corporations have consolidated their power. They live in a world now where all their workers are disposable, where they can abandon them at will in terms of economic downturn, or where they decide they just aren't good enough. We think that workers deserve stability. And even if that means being in a job that is difficult to do, or you get tired of at some point, it allows you to access fulfillment in everywhere else in your life, and we're very proud to stand over it. First, let's engage with their pushbacks on what they think the stance looks like in this round. A couple of responses. The first is that they tell you that no, that we're not going to do things like unjust firing because we have other avenues to get around this. One, I would flag that a lot of their mechanisms later on rely on things like firing being a common practice, to have the fear that instills workers in working harder and harder. Notice the company set those standards for what they are, so they can always tell you that you're falling short of that and you're doing things like firing. Two, what's their mechanism? Workers are going to sue. How many workers have their ability to take on companies and sue them for unjust firings in those scenarios? Who have the finances or capacity to do that? I think it's very unrealistic. I think what that means is, just for their comparative to function and to be realistic, they have to accept things like firing being very possible. But additionally, these don't even have to be unjust. They can just tell you that you're not doing good enough because they've raised their in the chat, please. Or they can say that just in times of economic downturn, they're justified in laying loads of people off, which they're able to justify very comfortably. So what this looks like is always somewhere that is more unstable. What they then tell you is the reason that the declines happened is because people have challenged institutions and then everyone is super empowered. My understanding of South Korea is that it's a lovely place, but it isn't the only place we're talking about in this round, right? I think fundamentally, it is fair to say that in generally speaking, corporations have gained much more power than any individual people have. And there's just structural reasons for this other than trust me on history, bro, which is to say that corporations just have so much more money to lobby government that they're always going to have more leverage than individual workers to create pressure, or even workers when they're unionized who just don't get hired in the long run. What I think this means is the decline is one that is much more powered by corporations, one where they have more control and the dynamic still lies with them. They try and tell you they don't have to defend necessarily gig economies. What we're telling you is that just what the trend has looked like, which is a move away from stable employment necessarily trends to the extremes of freelance, and that's what it looks like as this trend continues. Okay then, let's dive into some refutation on specifically what this looks like, and we'll clash this with our argumentation. So we gave you a point on what we think life at work looks like for the worker. They then tell you why they think that there's likely to be things like corporate abuse. What I want to flag on their point of corporate abuse is, if the only way that they're getting this is leverage, I think at best is pretty much zero sum, which is to say that, okay, maybe you can't leave the workforce under our side, mean that they can abuse you, but the company also can't fire you for calling them out, but under their side you also probably can't leave because you wouldn't have a job, and that'd be incredibly dangerous for you because you wouldn't have any income and you don't really have the capital to call them out. So I think in our worst case scenarios, corporations, yep, they probably do have the power, and that's pretty damaging. But maybe if you just never call them out under their side in the first place, you lose any chance of being seen. But secondly, we think things like workers collaborating together is much more likely to be successful on their side, because they can't just say, we're going to lay off all of you in this department if you keep threatening us like this, because they literally don't have the capacity to do so. So if all workers are experiencing something similar, like a difficulty, it's much more able that these people you've worked with for decades, you're able to collaborate with and go and talk to your boss about why working conditions are really, really bad. Then try and tell you some other things, which is leaving your job is incredibly stigmatized. Yeah, we don't think leaving your job job is particularly accessible under either side of the house. And we don't think leaving your job is the best mechanism for this, rather that we provide the mechanisms as we provide in Mia's speech, which is why you're able to do things like actively change what it looks like inside the company. What mechanisms does Mia give you, and what are the responses we get to that? She gives you a couple of responses as to why company is going to invest in you more effectively. One, that they get a guaranteed return on you, which is they're not upskilling you for you to become nicer for another company to poach you, which is reasons why they would only get you to do your job and no more. No response. What we think this means is this is an exclusive reason why companies invest in you more under our side of the house, where they're more willing to upskill you or give you more autonomy because they don't fear you fleeing the company. This is another reason also why companies are able to get more efficient because they can invest in workers to get the payoff in the long run. The second mechanism is you get things like relating to people. You get mechanisms like relating to people and being much more closer to people. They try and flip this, say, oh, it's going to be like really coercive and dangerous. But I think it's realistic to say if you work with someone every day, you have an incentive to try and make it as positive an interpersonal relationship as possible. And sure, you and the CEO aren't best buds, but there's a chain of command there where you're friends with the people who are up above you. Again, a lack of response to why this would actually be beneficial in making your life a worse better. They give a couple of responses to what then this looks like. The first is, oh, it's only to college graduates, means they only cater to college graduates. But a college graduate's calculation is obviously different if they know they're opting into employment for the rest of their life. Like, sure, if you're a college graduate who's opting into a job for 2 years, you don't consider your pension package, but you sure as hell do if that's where you're going to be for the rest of your life, which is why they likely cater to other things, where you're looking at a more long-term plan in those scenarios anyway. What this looks like then is that we think this is actually much more preferable because you opt into an entire package. Because if you're competing under their side of the house for a 2-year contract and is a college graduate who's only demanding a starting out salary versus someone who wants a guarantee of a pension because they plan to work there 5 years and then retire, then they're always going to hire the person who's just less effort for the company under their side of the house. And what we think this means is only when everyone is opting in at the same level, you're likely to get things like good security for the future. But additionally, they're trying to symmetricize this, which is like, oh, you always want this to be good, you always want to be competitive for other workers and things like that. Again, that doesn't respond to me as a specific analysis as to why under these scenarios you get this better relations and why you get a guaranteed return. What we told you then this looked like is not only do we think exploitation is less likely because of these links that you get, and this goes beyond just the leverage clash that we get, so if you ignore that, but additionally, where they just do things like invest in you, give you more opportunities as an individual to work in that company, and why that looks better. What we additionally then explain to you is reasons why employees are likely to reciprocate in these scenarios, why they're forming personal connections, and why their knowledge of the system means that they do better. Notice what all of these things, though, proves to mean, which is partly why employees enjoy doing that job, but also why they do a better job, which is why they do like having knowledge of the system or working for the long-term health of the company, because if you're there in 20 years, then you want a long-term plan to be actualized. This then clashes their analysis as to why it's likely to be a bad place for workers, which I'll engage in momentarily, but before that, I'll take a point.
If a company can't fire you on your side and knows that you'll work in this company for the rest of your life, why do they have incentives to change when you complain?
Well, I think this is because if you say like, well, I'm working for you for the rest of my life, right? So if I tell you this is like making my work less efficient, then you're just losing money by having me here. I'm going to be here anyways. You have to like maybe deal with me if I continue to be here. But additionally, like, I think I just want to have like more hope about people than maybe they have under their side, which is to say, if you form a genuine relation with someone who's worked there for a decade and you say, you know how much work I've put into this company from the moment that I stepped in the doors, you want me to have like, I need more like freedom to go home and not be worked to push overtime as much, they're more likely to heed those requests. But ultimately, if you become an inefficient worker, they're totally stuck with you. They can't fire you and do a bad performance for you. They give you a couple of mechanisms as to why workers are just going to like work badly. This is bad for the company and bad for workers. A couple of responses to this. They basically tell you, and I think mechanisms 2 and 3 collapse into each other, which is that you have the ability to like fire employees, and the third is that workers like don't need to work that hard. I think basically they're saying there's no fear factor here, there's no reward, and there's no like pressure, there's no carrot in the stick. A couple of responses to this. First, there are just other mechanisms which exist other than the threat of firing you or the encouragement of promotion, which encourage you to do things like work hard. Things are like what everyone else thinks of you. If everyone knows that they're putting 10 times the weight which you're pulling, then you likely get bad stares when you go to the water cooler, and those are all things which pressure you to work hard. Second, you might get actual satisfaction, right? If you're going to be there for like 20 years, then you probably want to do something which gets you satisfaction, which might look like actualizing a project rather than trudging through it every single day. What we think that means is this is like other mechanisms why people might want to work hard in those scenarios. But additionally, I think we can flip this, because they try and tell you it's like reasons why you work hard, but I think it's reasons why corporate work environments under the status quo become incredibly toxic, because it's all about the fight for promotion and the dog-eat-dog world which encourages you to work incredibly hard or get cut off the table. Those are things that encourage people to sacrifice their personal life in favor of working incredibly hard so they don't get cut in the next round of layoffs. I think those are particularly detrimental, because if the world that we have to defend is where workers don't work as hard as they would under their side, but still have stable employment for the rest of their life, I'm totally fine with that, because there's no response to me as analysis as to why this is particularly stable, where there's access to freedom for them for the rest of their life in every other sector. We think that if it's that you work to live rather than live to work, that's a good thing, because you can access things like better bank loans that you wouldn't have got without security under their side. For these reasons, we are very proud to propose.
All right. Thank the speaker for those very fine remarks. And to continue the opposition in this grand finals, second up now, please hear her.
Hi, am I both audible and visible?
Yep.
Okay. Before I start, I just want to give a shout out to all my debate coaches that I've had in the past and all my KWSCC friends that are awake right now to listen to this debate, and my two lovely teammates, Sue and Ethan, as well as Team Scotland for sparring with us, for debating against us. Okay. Verbal POI is pronoun she, her. If everyone's ready, I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. With a dad that works a model lifetime employment life, with the 9 to 6 working hours, but really it's an 8 to 7, I really wish that Scotland's depiction of a lifetime employment is true. But unfortunately, it's not. When lifetime employment was the norm, people died. People were harassed, and people were left isolated for speaking out, pressured into staying quiet if they didn't want a hostile environment for the rest of their life. This is not a world in which Korea supports, very proud to propose. Firstly, I'm going to be talking about worker interest and why this is something that we exclusively gain in our world. But secondly, why even if we consider the social impacts of these changes in economy, we win. Lastly, I'm going to give an extension on why this decline has acted in favor of necessity, considering society's values. Firstly, though, on worker interest, there's 3 main things that team opposition tries to push to us. Firstly, is that if your company can fire you, you are in a far more volatile state and you don't want to do things like report on injustices. Secondly, that they exclusively gain stability, and lastly, that you have interpersonal connections. Let's start with this first claim, that you are volatile and under our world because your company can fire you. The first thing that I want to tell you is that if an incident happens, you don't want to stay. So you don't fear whether your company fires you or not. You want to leave. Something you can't do in opposition, where if you leave this job, you have no job. You have no form of financial support, which is why you are so afeared of that. We don't have that in our world in the first place. But secondly, they never tell you why this is something that is likely to happen in the first place, where your company fires you for no reason. Obviously, unjust firing is something that happens in both worlds and something that we think that we are able to respond to relatively adequately, considering that there are already social mechanisms in place. However, if we do concede that it is hard for an individual worker or employee to sue or take their company to court, that's exactly why they can't do it either. Note that their response to our POI on what happens on workplace sexual assault is that you can simply take the company to court, or you can try to get legal action with them. The difference then is that under both worlds, if we also concede that we can't get legal action, on our world, at least you can leave your job and find a new one. On their world, there's no alternative. Lastly, they tell us that abuses are exclusively easier to talk about under their counterfactual because you're going to stay with these people for the whole time. No, as Ethan already addresses in his POI, if the company is already sure that you are going to stay in this company, they have no incentive to change. Your upper bosses don't care about you because you know that this is the only way that you're going to be able to earn a living in the first place. I'll take you a bit later. Secondly, on the issue of stability, I want to tell you 3 things. Firstly, that this is a retrospective motion, meaning considering Asian countries' unique context of extreme reliance on lifetime employment, the decline of lifetime employment hasn't been to the point where people get laid off on the day like they do in Western countries like the US. Contextually, that means that you are still likely to be stable to a certain extent. It's not going to be a complete reliance on gig economy like they tell you. But secondly, note that stability and profit and other workplace values are now a choice. Certain jobs like government workers have specialized in their stability. Others, like freelance entrepreneurs, have specialized in flexibility. The options to be stable are still provided in our world is why it is so key. Note that this contends with DPM's point on how everyone needs to have the same level of opt-in on how much of a future they plan. That is not true. Under their world, you only have one option, which is that you stay for life. Under our world, we are now finally being able to access other options with the decline of lifetime employment. Lastly, though, even if we have to trade off worker stability, the value of being able to opt out of your workplace is greater for 2 reasons. First, a decrease in stability is not as much of a problem in our world where employment is flexible. If I can be rehired even when I'm older, there's less financial pressure right now simply because I'm laid off. Second, the vulnerability of those who cannot opt out weighs against those who are potentially laid off. Societal and government safety nets exist for unemployed people. The same doesn't apply for victims of powerful authorities that we characterize to you. The last point under the first point then, on interpersonal connections, 3 things. First, we tell you that it's nice if you find workplace, and we concede that. But if you consider that the workplace is toxic, which is the characterization that we clearly characterize to you, we don't see why it's going to be something that's likely in the first place that you find such comfort within your workplace. Sure, you may bond over shared trauma, but we don't know how strong that is. But second, note that especially by the characteristics that it's very rigid and tied by seniority. The concept is not that you get close to your boss, it's that you get close to your coworkers who are on the same level of power as you. That means that no matter how many interpersonal connections you create, it's not going to be to the level that benefits you significantly or allows you to be able to speak out against the authorities. The authorities is always going to be an us versus them narrative. Lastly, though, even if we do need to trade off interpersonal connections, if we're able to prove to you that work-life balance is something that is better secured under our world, which is what I've already talked about, and you have more flexibility in being able to create other friends outside of work, we see that as infinitely better. Who wants work friends anyway? Before I go on, I'll take a POI.
Workers who feel suicidal because of workplace harassment will not be productive to the company. Why then do your friends at work allow the situation which is harming you to actively continue?
Okay, I think this is kind of a twist because that's also one of the reasons why we tell you it's so bad. We tell you that the reason why economy in Asian countries like Korea and Japan was so stagnant was because there were workers literally not fulfilling their role, literally being ineffective, or literally not wanting to come to work because they were getting harassed, yet companies would not lay them off. Firstly, because it's against the social norm, but secondly, because it's simply not an option that they consider within their solutions. So yes, it harms actors both ways. Firstly, on the employee that is getting actively harassed. And note that this is the reality for a lot of female workers, especially. If your boss asked you to sing, even though you have no idea how to sing, you had to do so, and you had no choice to opt out of that. That's the reality they had to face. Secondly, on societal interests, there's two things that they tell us here. Firstly, that the gig economy is exactly what our counterfactual looks like, even though we've already prevented it. And secondly, that they exclusively invest in workers. Firstly, under this point of gig economy, I don't think that this is as largely relevant. Note that many of our arguments apply in similar ways, considering that the financial flexibility that you gain from gig economy is very similar as to those that are shorter terms. But also, note that that's simply not the reality. The economy is clearly better right now with more opportunities. We don't see why this is as largely a problem. The second thing that they tell us is that because they're able to invest furthermore in workers, it's going to be a benefit. The first thing that I tell you is that investment is limited, because what exactly do you invest in workers in the long term? Like, sure, you can try to provide them more pension, but at the end of the day, that's not going to be within the interest of the company, because you know that this worker is not going to leave anyway. Secondly, even if it's true that you invest in workers, though, the impact on the debate is minimal. No one is having life-changing benefits that comes from investment in workers, and if so, then they need to provide a mechanism as to why this is true. Lastly, then, in extension, why this decline has acted in favor of societal interests. And here I want to address something that they talked about in the previous speech, which is on lower birth rates. The reason why low birth rates were so common in Asian nations like Korea and Japan is because the working culture prevented people from having children. They told you that your family is second, your company is first, your work-life balance doesn't exist because it's work all the way. Therefore, people had no time to raise kids. For instance, in Japan, it was considered a virtue if you dozed off during work because it meant that you spent the night at the company and you didn't go back to your house. That's literally the reality of what people had to face. That's exactly why when the norm was that you would not hire a woman with boyfriends, or you would have an immense pressure to not get pregnant in the first place, you would not offer any opportunities. And the problem that this becomes is that there are no opportunities in the future for you to get reemployed. Under their world, let's assume that there is unjust layoffs, that because you're pregnant, you have gotten laid off. At least in the future, you can try to pursue a job again. Under our world, companies have no incentive to do so, from the point in which they already see it as a better investment to find someone who is younger. They create an environment where you cannot raise kids, where you cannot accommodate for the aging population. And because that is simply not in the interest of our society, very proud to propose.
All right, thank you, speaker, for those very fine remarks. And as a final substantive from Team Proposition, I'd like to invite the third proposition speaker to speak now. Here.
Hi, can everyone hear and see me okay?
Yep.
Cool. Setting a timer. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Korea made a mistake when their first argument was telling us why workers don't work hard under our side of the house. That just feeds into their own ideas of exploitation. If the end point of that argument is that workers are more productive, or that you try and work harder to get a promotion, this means you work yourself into the ground. This is when you do overtime without getting paid for it in the hope of getting a promotion. What they want in terms of companies being productive is workers being exploited. They are the side that exploits workers and holds them in shackles. We decide with frees them and provides a much better environment in which to work. Two clashes in this speech. First of all, on company conditions. Second of all, on civility. First of all, on the conditions within a company. Opposition tell you two things. One, they tell you that we cannot call out under our side of the house. And second of all, they say on the comparative, they can. I just want to highlight that I think the power a company has is likely the same under either side of the house. Four responses as to why they're unable to call out companies under their side of the house. One, we tell you that losing your job and the fear of that is likely a wash, and that applies under either side of the house. All two tell you, oh, that's fine because you simply want to leave and therefore losing your job is not a risk. No, you want to stick out the job under either side of the house because money is the most important thing. Being able to feed yourself, heat your home, and make sure your family is safe and comfortable is your priority. Either side of the house, no thank you. You care more about your payroll. Therefore, you're not going to call out people under their side of the house or under our side of the house because you fear that you lose your job. But that becomes less under our side of the house at the point to which opposition themselves tell you we're unable to fire people. If we're unable to fire people, and that is much less likely, you're okay with calling people out because there's a less of a risk that you lose your job and lose that money. On coercion, I think there is much more of coercive force under their side of the house. Second, no thank you. You're far less replaceable under our side of the house. Under our side of the house, when you've worked in this company for many, many years, you have expertise, you have bonds with those around you, and you have unique ideas about what this company needs and what it needs to be pushed forward. I just think, well, in that case, you're much less replaceable. Under opposition, you have worked there for 3 or 4 years, given the norm is people usually change jobs every time a company cycle comes around. What this means is they are much more replaceable because they have not gained that expertise, they have not gained those skills under their side. They can simply be fired because it is not that much of a cost to the company. But third of all, under their side, there is greater competition for jobs. You do not want to be fired because you fear you're not going to be able to get another one. There's lots of alternatives out there in the job market because there is a high turnover. Therefore, you're unlikely to leave that job. To leave that job because you fear you're going to be able to get another one. What that means is I just think it is more likely that you fear calling out under their side of the house because you don't want to lose your job and for all the reasons we've given you. But the analysis they give you on our side, explaining why we are unable to call out, only explains why we're unable to call out, not why there's going to be a negative, not why there's going to be a negative working environment in the first place. We tell you there is no need to call out companies. The companies are likely to carry out good behavior. This is the whole point of our first argument. We tell you why companies have incentives to invest in workers, have incentives to care for them, and therefore there is no reason to call out in the first place. Their analysis can be true because they never attacked this first premise. We give you 3 reasons why companies are likely to invest. 1, there's a guaranteed return under our side of the house versus losing that investment you put into that individual to another company. This looks like training up an intern and then losing them to one of your biggest competitors, losing all that skills and then gaining that. They say this only applies to college graduates, but Sophie already tells you why college graduates likely look into the future when we're thinking about lifetime employment. No thank you. So they look to things such as pension plans, look to things such as how the older workers are treated in that environment. Therefore, it applies to everyone. Secondly, we tell you you're likely to build up a relationship. O2 tries and say, oh, you're only likely to build up a relationship with your close peers. No, I just think if you worked at this company for decades, you're likely to have interactions with your boss at the point to which you walk past their office every single day, or you go and eat lunch in the cafeteria together. Even if that's not the CEO of the company, I just think it's your supervisor who is then able to use leverage to help you get a better working environment. But third of all, on cost of training and hiring. No, thank you. Even if incentives are the same under our side of the house and companies want to exploit their workers and we have no capacity to call out, we just tell you there is greater resources under our side of the house for companies to have excess and therefore invest in their people. Even if under both sides companies want to help their employees, want to make their life better, it is under our side that we have the capacity. Because under our side, we are not constantly hiring and training people every to 5 years. The costs of this are astronomical, panel. So even if incentives as they wash, we still prove why there is greater capacity under our side to create a better working environment. What that means is we ultimately win this clash. And again, I want to flag, the more their first argument is true, the more it is an exploitative working environment. That is to say, if they want to talk about workers not being productive under our side of the house, we are fine with that, because that means they are not going and working into the night without pay. That means they are not stressing incredibly hard about getting a promotion. We are fine with our whole first argument, because it just feeds into more exploitation. No, thank you. I want to weigh why we care more about workers and conditions than productivity. Because if their first argument is true and they try and come in third and explain why this is important, I simply don't care. Because A, the impact is far more visceral if the workers do not work in positive conditions, at the point to which it is often about how much money to eat. No, thank you. But B, I just think poorer working conditions means less about productivity. If they actually do care about productivity, they would look after their workers, and meaning they're able to work and not take days off for mental health. On to the second class then, on stability. We give you multiple reasons as to why you're likely to lose your job under side opposition, but because of lifetime employment, it is highly unlikely under our side of the house. They give you a couple of responses to this in O2. First of all, they say something about government workers. No, thank you. I don't care. If government workers are stable under either side of the house, we're talking about corporate jobs here. Second of all, they tell you, they just assert that they are still stable under their side of the house, but we give you multiple reasons why you're likely to be fired. But even if it is true that it's more stable under their side of the house, that just feeds into your own territory, at the point to which the longer you stay there, the closer you are getting to lifetime employment norms or fall under our side of the house. They need to accept a norm of changing fairly regularly for their debate to work. The final thing they try and do to this argument is weigh it out. They tell you, I would much rather have people on benefits when they're unemployed versus having no protections for your company, no thank you, and having an exploitative environment. Two responses here. One, I just think they cannot rely on benefits given they are incredibly bureaucratic and not actually going to work. They cannot rely on that as a safety net. But second of all, I think the impacts are still visceral. This is about your quality of life. If they want people to just simply live off benefits, that is not a positive thing. I would much rather people have a stable job, stable employment, stable pension for when they retire than rely on government assistance. And maybe they have to work a bit harder during work. Maybe they are slightly exploited. They never actually paint us to why that is more visceral than having no money to feed your family. I want to weigh this in two ways. One, the worst case under their side of the house is you go through periods of time where you have no job at all. This is for four reasons. A, job markets is incredibly competitive. We've already told you this. B, you're competing against younger people. They themselves tell you this, therefore it is more difficult to get a job. C, you have skills that are more suited to your previous job than the new job, therefore your resume is not suited. But D, I just think companies make you do things such as sign non-compete agreements because they don't want you going and working for their competitor. What that means is it's incredibly difficult to find a job under their side of the house, increasing the intensity and impact at a point to which they do not allow stability. But second of all, even in a worst case scenario where people just have less of a ability to plan long term, this means you go into debt because you take a mortgage that is too expensive. It is still quite an intense impact and weighs over everything else in the round. So proud to propose.
All right, I thank the speaker for those very fine remarks. And as a final substantive from team opposition as well as in the overall debate, I'd like to invite third opposition to take the floor and speak now, please. Here you go.
Hi, am I audible and visible? Okay, thank you. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, there's a reason the decline has happened. The proposition entirely forgets that this is a retrospective debate.
This is not a valid debate, which means that if lifetime employment is proved to not align with the current generation's incentives and interests, that is the exact moment at which opposition already wins the round. With that, I have two things to do in my speech. First, prove the first clash about the individual lives of these workers, and prove the second clash about how we win on the efficiency and entire productivity of companies, especially in the long run. But first, moving on to the first clash, about the lives of these workers. About if employees care more about your working conditions. Proposition mainly says the fact that you're going to be in the company equals that we will try to give you more rewards, and we will, like, at that in our world, we'll just fire people arbitrarily. First, there's literally no incentive for companies to fire random employees when they have done nothing wrong. It's only when they're problematic. And we believe companies entirely have the right to fire employees who don't work. Even in a worst case scenario where those arbitrary firings happen, we completely trade that off, because we believe that's because that employee was problematic and that employee will be ineffective in your world as well. Second, even if they're fired in a worst case scenario, we tell you they have jobs to go to, because we have that narrative that you don't need to stay in a job for the long run. Everyone in our world is finding short-term contracts, which means companies are also more open for people who have been fired from other companies, which is why other companies are more open to you to opt into their own company. Third, in their world, people finger at you and call you with that bad reputation when you leave, and that's why you can't opt in to other jobs, because in your world, you are stuck in that narrative that you only have that esteemed value within a company if you were there for a long time. But B, about how employees can talk about their concerns and negotiate with the company if they have concerns. Proposition says if you work with someone every day, you're more comfortable in talking and negotiating with them. First, we think that we can simply flip this. First, if you're comfortable with your boss, it means your boss is comfortable with you as well. This metric is not only about sexual harassment. It's the pressure you feel daily from your boss. It's the pressure you feel that you need to overwork if you actually value your company in the long run. Second, we at least have forced timestamps for negotiations where that short-term contract ends. But in your side, those forced negotiations in the least do not happen at all. Also, if there's an imbalance between the company and employee in both roads, like they too concede, in our road, at least in the worst case, they can leave and find other workplaces. In your road, you can't, and you're emotionally burdened because you know you can't, and your own exploitative boss is telling you you can't move to other companies as well, because simply it's the fact that those opportunities don't exist, and that this narrative that have been stuck for the past few decades have removed the opportunities for these exploited employees to remove their job places in your world. Also, they can't have it both ways. We tell you, they can say companies can negotiate with workers, but workers can negotiate with companies as well, while employees will still be incentivized to work. We told you, we can also flip their argument about incentivized work, but also prop can't have it both ways. Because on the other hand, they say workers cannot sue companies because companies have more power than workers. But on the other hand, on their side, you can call out corporate abuse because many people go through the same struggle. If companies are so much stronger than workers, you can't call it out in both roles. While we tell you at least you can leave that workplace on our side, and that's the delta at which we win this debate. But see, about stability as the esteemed value. Propositions say that stability bleeds into freedom as well. We told you that's not true. In their PYTE then, they see the reason South Korea's birth rates are plummeting is because of lack of economic stability. This is such a lazy assumption. First, birth rates are plummeting because people are too invested in work, and they think they don't work for a living but live to work.
Information.
The reason Asian governments, no thank you, are trying to have a decline in lifetime employment is because they know people need more flexibility in jobs. They know people esteem the value of quote-unquote flexibility more than stability, that people want time to care for their families when they're pregnant. That's why if there's stable employment anyways, and everyone knows they will be there forever, we don't get where those incentives come from. Third, a lot of their benefits like pensions still exist in our side. In their side, a lot of those benefits are only guaranteed for people with seniority and longevity. In our world, the societal narrative will shift, where the same benefits like the pensions you talked about are given even when you're not an employee in a company, for example, when you're graduate to when you're 65. Also, the proposition tries to create benefits in our world symmetric. They don't stand because the reason we want to get rid of this social precedent is literally because the narrative that your work is your life is fading away. People want a work-life balance now. That's the important narrative that already exists in the status quo in most Asian societies. This takes their main claim now that they will be dogs and overworking when they're not guaranteed longevity, because people actually care more about the flexibility. And even when it's short-term contracts, we told you that they will be caring more about work-life balance than being overworking and being dogs like they characterize in your side. But before I move on to clash 2 point.
Young people today suffer instability in every part of their lives, fluctuating housing markets, concerned about changing climates. Why does your side see it as justifiable to remove stability in their careers as well?
We told you, if there's instability in other sectors of your life, that's even more why you're more vulnerable in your company when they tell you you need to overwork for you to actually get those benefits you give you in their world. So that's why they'll be more dependent in your world. And that's why we want, at least in our worst case scenario, instability is not that of an esteemed value, because people, for them to actually solve those other problems in their lives, need flexibility, and stability is not of an esteemed value in that status quo. Moving on to clash 2, about the efficiency and productivity of companies. A, the incentive to work harder. Proposition says employees still care about the company because they care about longevity. First, in the status quo, companies care more about changing quickly and abruptly to short-term changes. Even in their best case, where people care more about long-term actions within the company, when short-term changes happen, which are frequent in the modern economy, they need to then train their employee and tune them to what they need, while employees on our side can better hire new people that are more fit. Second, the reason employees care about longevity, that can be co-opted in our side. If employees care so much about being in one company for a long time, like it characterized, then employees would try to show their potential and perform their best in the long run by being more productive. Even if they may care more about longevity, we don't get any mechanism on why they would actually contribute. Even if this is true, we told you why short-term results of the company are much more important, because the training they provide on their side, even if you concede to it, is simply not a benefit. It's just that this salaryman's body becomes conceptualized as a machine. His thinking and working behavior are opened up to the mechanical reentrainment and tuning that this management is going to be able to change within your side of the world. One of the reasons other kind of lifetime employment happened in Japan was resulting increased competitiveness many companies face. When a company globalizes, a company needs to make quicker changes to its staff, because companies require flexibility in our modern economy because things change quickly. We told you that value is a more esteemed value in the current Gen Z. Even when proposition concedes that people might work harder, they say that toxic environment is something that is more important. But first, we told you productivity is something that is actually very important. And second, they said unhappy workers are unproductive workers. If workers want to be satisfactory, then that's the metric in our side. They need to be productive. So companies will make sure that that toxic environment then does not exist if they care about productivity so much in our work as well. And that's why we oppose.
Okay, thank you, speaker, for those very fine remarks. And that is the end of the substantive part of the grand final debate. Moving on to the reply portion, opposition reply to go first as usual. Here.
Okay, can you hear me and see me?
Yeah.
Cool, thank you. There's a reason why Prop 3 didn't take the POI. It's because Scotland intends to win this round on one claim and one claim only, that working in lifetime employment was the most stable thing for you, that it helps you feed your family, and that's all that matters for this person. If we take down this one contingency, that lifetime employment means you're more stable, their case falls. What do we say in response to this? One, that there's a norm shift on their side, on our side, with a decline in lifetime employment, that companies on our side, with this norm shift, because there is a decline, are more important to short-term contracts on our side, that if it's no longer you're unstable to leave your job because it's normal to leave your job, companies are more important to rehiring other people. And that's why it's not that unstable, not that risky for you to leave your job because you know that there is a chance that you get rehired on our side too. This is something that companies are likely open to be doing on our side. Something that we framed from first, no response from their side. Two, that companies being more inefficient because workers don't work hard means that they're forced to cut people. Again, from first, no response from their side. The fact that companies now have a lot of workers that aren't actually trying hard means that they need to cut a lot of those workers, that they can't actually sustain having that many workers in the first place. Actually, more instability on their side. We flip this down the bench, no response from their side of the house as well. Our case was simple then. We thought that workers who are qualified don't need to suffer, that even if they put in the effort on their side, they cannot be promoted. That if they're shackled to one job, you have no flexibility, that you have to live near the company your whole life and you can't live in a different country. And importantly, here's what we noted about their case, because their case seems to be that, oh, actually the cost of living are actually so high that the current economy inflation is bad. That is literally our argument, that in the world in which a lot of things are changing, you need to have the capacity to do things like renegotiation. You need to have the capacity, once you move to a different company, renegotiate your contract to adjust for that inflation, to negotiate your prices and your wages to be higher so that you can actually adjust to the inflation that exists within status quo. Importantly, on their comparative, we noted from first that you can't do this renegotiation, that your prices and salary likely still stay the same. And basically, oh, all we care about is that you still keep your job, that you still keep stability. No, that stability is meaningless. Insofar as they themselves can see that prices are rising, that stability means that your cost of living, your quality of life constantly, consistently goes down. Something that we told you, again, from first, didn't respond on their side. The second way we won this round was on your capacity to call out abuse. And we noted that if you're dependent on just one company, that means that it is harder for you to call out abuse. The fact that you can't move to different jobs means that it is often hard for you to leave that company. Their response is quite telling. They say that, oh, you are more comfortable with calling it out because you know you can't be fired. Like, again, sure, you're more comfortable with calling it out, but if they themselves concede that companies have more power than workers, sure, you're more comfortable with calling it out, but does a company have incentives to change is the question. Does the company really want to change if A, they know that you can never leave the company, that you're bound with them forever, and B, even if you're comfortable with calling it out, they just simply have more power than you that they concede and companies don't have incentives to change. Insofar as that is true, what was the comparative on our side? Because we took them at their best. Sure, maybe we can see that a company has more power than you, but the difference on our side was that you can negotiate with the company, that you don't have to work for that company anymore, that you can always pursue alternate companies that you know will not commit corporate abuse against you, that you're not subject to that one company for the rest of your life. Yeah, you can call it out, but companies won't change on either side of the house, which means that the best alternative for these people who got abused were to find different companies, to renegotiate contracts, to find another chance at finding a better job in a different company. That is what we uniquely provided to these workers that they never responded to down the bench. So those are two independent paths to victory. And on our side, we were able to gain more stability in the job. But second, even if that stability wasn't true, we were willing to trade that off because we rewarded workers that worked hard, and that was something that was valuable to many workers within the world. But three, that for the many victims of corporate abuse, we gave them an alternative that they otherwise wouldn't have with lifetime employment. We're very proud to oppose.
I thank the opposition reply speaker for those very fine remarks, and to close the overall debate, proposition reply. Here.
Hello, can you all see and hear me okay?
Yep, all good.
Great. Okay, I'll start in 3, 2, 1. Corporations have fed workers the same line that side opposition has fed you, panel. That a world in which you don't know if you'll have a job 2 years down the line, or they might fire you because they decide you're not working hard enough, is actually about your freedom. We disagree. We think guaranteeing that you have a stable source of income and that you are invested in a company and they invest in you is a much better way to live. A couple of clashes in this speech. First, let's look at the idea of exploitation. I think a huge amount of their case, in fact, all of it, relies on the idea that the workers exercise leverage over their company. I think realistically, at the end of this debate, neither side is proving that they materially solve exploitation, because we both agree that overall corporations tend to exercise more power than the individual, that the individual can't opt to take legal action, they can't opt to overturn a company. We have competing claims then of what we think this looks like. We told you that you're more likely to call out because they cannot fire you. They said you call out, but they don't change. They said, well, maybe you don't call out, but you can opt to leave. We said that leaving was really scary because then you likely don't have a job and you prioritize that above all else. But additionally, we told you that given this is a culture of exploitation that exists across companies, they don't explain to you why there are loads of other benevolent companies that are just accepting less profit because they don't do worker exploitation. We think this is likely something endemic across all. We think then the unique mechanisms that we gave about why you are in a workplace where you're more likely to foster the types of relations which prevent exploitation and bad behavior are the only ones unique to this. But at the end of the day, we think this clash probably washes out and isn't a winning path for them. What then do we win on? We think it looks like the lives of workers. In 3, they give you this interesting push, which is actually Gen Z don't care about stability, but obviously this depends on who you think drove the force. So this is just saying what workers' lives are now is because of what their preferences are, which is obviously something we disagree on, given we push that companies prioritize. We've given you actual reasons why we think they care about stability. What have we told you that their world looked like? 1, the norm and expectation of moving. 2, just a high level of uncertainty in your companies. And this wasn't that companies would unjustly fire you as they uncharitably claimed. It was many different things. The first is that they decide their standards are higher than they were last time, and they fire you at the next performance review. 2, that in an economic squeeze, you are just cut out at the next round of layoffs because they don't prioritize holding on to workers. 3, that they give you a 2-year contract. And the truth is, you just don't know if you get offered it again at the end of that contract. Isn't it? You're terminated, you don't know what is offered. But even if you are offered, you don't know that what you'll be offered is something similar again. That isn't brutal and unjustified. It's just what their world realistically looks like, and it's the incentives they use themselves. So even in their best case, if you can find somewhere else, it looks like periods of unemployment, which we think for the average worker, they likely don't have the funds to sustain and isn't a comfortable time in their life. We think that in our worst case, given their characterization of workers not working hard, it's a world in which workers show up, work as much as is comfortable, and leave. We are happy to accept that with the freedoms that we get. We told you where you get a guarantee of what your income looks like for the rest of your life, what progression in your program looks like, what your job and day-to-day looks like, but also what your administrative benefits are, what your pension is, and what your healthcare is. Why is this amazing and something that all workers are likely to want? 1, you just don't have the crippling anxiety when you see inflation rising, that the meeting your company is scheduled for next week is one to tell you that you're fired. That is one that day to day gives you much more emotional stability. 2, you can actually plan your life. You can understand when it's going to be financially viable for you to have children rather than always putting it off because you think there might be a better point in the future. But 3, there are just a myriad of other benefits. Things like you actually getting offered mortgages because it's much easier to prove that you're a reliable person. What we think this means is you access much greater autonomy when you have more financial freedom and can plan. We're happy to accept that you ought work to live rather than live to work. Even if your job is unsatisfactory, we are the side that provides you the tools to access everything else in life because we guarantee that you can plan it. They told you under their side that people might work hard, but we gave responses to this. 1, there are other reasons just to do this, through gaining your own satisfaction, that you might want to get satisfaction at the job, but also pressure from the culture around you, i.e. workers disliking you because you're not pulling your weight. These are other reasons to work hard. The delta then they get on their side is the types of damaging working hard, which is the flip that we give you down the beds. This is corporate jargon for working unpaid overtime and accepting minimal praise from people. What we think then this means is ours is a side which guarantees security for workers, one where they work for the love of the job and for the security of themselves and their family. Side proposition.
Thank you very much, speaker, for those very fine remarks, and thank you very much, everyone. That is the end of an excellent debate in the grand final, so congratulations, everyone, for completing that. Virtually inviting everybody to cross floor, shake hands, and if the panel could move to the available breakout room for deliberation, let's just take room 1. We'll be there to chat. The results will be announced in the closing ceremony as usual. Thank you very much, everyone.